My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "It's nothing personal, Vernon. You just make things awkward." That was the Thursday before Thanksgiving. I stood in her kitchen, the kitchen in the house my son grew up in, the house I helped him buy the down payment for, and I didn't say a word. I picked up my jacket from the chair, thanked her for the coffee I hadn't finished, and drove home in the dark. I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a civil engineer with the city of Ottawa. I raised 2 kids mostly alone after my wife passed. I coached hockey on Saturday mornings until my knees gave out. I am not a complicated man. I don't call scenes. I don't drink too much at dinners. I listen more than I talk. But apparently I make things awkward. My son called that evening. His name is Kevin. He's 41, works in commercial real estate, drives a truck that costs more than my first house. He didn't apologize. He explained. There's a difference, though most people confuse the two. He said his wife, her name is Gillian, had been stressed about hosting this year. Her parents were flying in from Vancouver. Her sister was coming with a new boyfriend nobody had met yet. Kevin said it would just be a lot of moving parts. He said maybe I could come for leftovers on the Friday. Leftovers. I said I understood. I told him to have a good holiday. I hung up and sat in my armchair for a long time watching the streetlights come on outside. My daughter, Patricia, she lives in Sudbury with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. She called the next morning. She'd heard. She was furious on my behalf, which I appreciated, but there was nothing to be done about it. I told her not to make it worse by saying something to Kevin. She said, "Dad," in that tone she has, like she's the parent and I'm the one who needs managing. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I was something close to it, and the difference mattered. Here's what nobody tells you about being in your late 60s. You accumulate a very specific kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It's the loneliness of becoming optional, of watching the people you love most build lives that are full and busy and well-organized, and realizing that you are not load-bearing in those lives anymore. You are decorative, at best. A piece of furniture they feel vaguely guilty about when they walk past it. My wife, Susan, would have known what to say to Kevin. She always did. She had this way of cutting through to the thing underneath the thing, the real conversation inside the polite one. I never had that gift. I'm better with blueprints than with people. Always have been. She passed 11 years ago now. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. Kevin was 30. Patricia was 26. We got through it the way families get through things, badly, together, and then eventually okay. I retired 3 years ago. The transition was harder than I expected. I had a routine for 32 years. I had a team, a purpose, a reason to put on a real shirt in the morning. Retirement, I discovered, is not a destination. It's a renegotiation with yourself that nobody prepares you for. What I did with the time. The thing I didn't tell Kevin or Patricia about, the thing I'd been working on quietly for almost 2 years, was a software platform for municipal infrastructure assessment. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like something a retired engineer tinkers with in his basement, because he doesn't know what else to do with himself, and maybe that's what it started as. But I'd spent 3 decades watching the city spend money badly, not corruptly, mostly, just inefficiently. Infrastructure assessments done on paper, with no integration between departments, no predictive modeling, no way to prioritize work before something failed. I'd watched bridges get emergency repairs because nobody had a system that flagged the slow deterioration. I'd watched water main failures in January because the inspection cycles were calendar-based instead of condition-based. It was maddening, and I'd complained about it my entire career. And the last thing I did before I retired was write a 40-page proposal for a better system that nobody read. So I built it myself. I hired a young developer, a woman named Chen Wei, fresh out of Cartleton, sharp as anything, on a contract basis. I used savings I'd set aside. I incorporated a small company, ran it out of my second bedroom, drank too much coffee, and spent 2 years building something I actually believed in. By October of that year, we had a working platform. We had a pilot agreement with the City of Kingston. We had a second conversation going with a regional municipality in Northern Ontario. And we had a meeting scheduled on the Monday after Thanksgiving with a venture capital firm in Toronto that a colleague of mine from 30 years ago had connected me to. I hadn't told Kevin about any of it. I hadn't told Patricia either, partly because I didn't want to hear the careful encouragement that's really just doubt wearing a supportive hat, partly because it still felt fragile, like something that might collapse if I described it out loud, partly, I'll be honest, because after 32 years of being the steady, responsible one, I wanted one thing that was just mine. So that Thursday, when Gillian told me I make things awkward, I drove home and I sat in my armchair and I felt sorry for myself for about an hour. And then I made a pot of coffee and I went back to work. I spent that Thanksgiving alone. Patricia offered to drive down from Sudbury. I told her absolutely not. It was a 7-hour round trip and she had her own family. She sent me a care package anyway, a container of her turkey soup, some of those oatmeal cookies my grandkids make that are objectively terrible, and I love anyway, and a card that said, "You are not optional to us, Dad." I kept the card on my desk. Kevin sent a text on Thanksgiving Day that said, "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad. Hope you're having a good one." I replied with a thumbs up. I worked all weekend. Chen Wei and I had a final prep call on the Sunday afternoon. She was nervous about the Monday meeting. I told her the work spoke for itself. She said, "Vernon, you say that like it's enough." I said, "It has to be." She laughed like she wasn't sure if I was wise or naive. Honestly, I wasn't sure either. The meeting was at 2 in the afternoon, in a glass office tower on Bay Street. I wore the good suit, the charcoal one I'd bought for Kevin's wedding, and worn maybe 3 times since. I took the train down Monday morning, walked from Union Station, got there 20 minutes early, and had a coffee in the lobby like a man who had done this 100 times. I had never done anything like this in my life. There were 4 people in the room. The senior partner, a man around 50, the kind of calm that comes from having seen a lot of pitches, and 3 others. I'd been told we had 45 minutes. I talked for 20, walked them through the platform, showed them the Kingston pilot data, explained the market. There are over 3,000 municipalities in Canada. Most of them are running infrastructure assessment on spreadsheets or older systems that don't talk to each other. The problem is enormous, underfunded, and completely unsexy to everyone except the people who actually have to manage aging roads and water systems and bridges, which is a lot of people. There was a moment about halfway through where the senior partner leaned forward slightly and asked me to go back to the risk modeling slide. I went back. He asked 2 questions. I answered them. He sat back. I finished. There was a pause. He said, "How long did you say you were in the sector?" I said 32 years. He said, "It shows." They asked for the financials. We gave them the financials. They asked about the team. I talked about Chen Wei. I told them I was looking to bring on 2 more engineers and a sales lead once funding was in place. They nodded. The meeting ran over by 20 minutes. Nobody seemed to mind. I took the train home that evening not knowing anything more than I had that morning, except that the thing I built had made 4 experienced people lean in and pay attention. That felt like enough for one day. I called Patricia from the train platform. She didn't know about the meeting, didn't know about any of it, really. So I had a lot to explain before I could get to the part where I told her the meeting had gone well. There was a long silence when I finished. Then she said, "Dad, how long have you been doing this?" I said, "Almost 2 years." She said, "Dad," again, in a completely different tone than the one she uses when she's managing me. This one was something else, something quieter. I got home around 9. I ate the last of Patricia's turkey soup and went to bed. The call came 11 days later. I was at my desk Tuesday morning working through some revisions Genway had flagged. My phone rang, the number came up as the Toronto area code, the firm's office line. I answered. It was the senior partner's assistant asking if I was available for a call at 3 that afternoon. At 3 o'clock he told me they wanted to move forward. He walked me through the terms. I wrote everything down on paper because that's how I work. When he finished, I said I'd have my lawyer review the documents and get back to him within 48 hours. I hung up, put the pen down, and sat very still for a moment. The number he'd named was not a billionaire number. I want to be accurate here, because I'm not a man who exaggerates. But it was a number that was going to change the shape of my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. It was a number that said, the thing you built, the thing you worked on alone in your second bedroom for 2 years, the thing you didn't tell anyone about because you didn't want to see the careful doubt on their faces, that thing was real. I called Chen Wei first. She burst into tears. I wasn't far off, if I'm honest. I called Patricia that evening. She screamed, actually screamed, and then apologized for screaming, and then screamed again. Her husband got on the phone and said, "Vernon, I always knew." I liked him more in that moment than I ever had before. I didn't call Kevin, not out of spite. I want to be clear about that. I'm 67 years old, I don't have the energy for spite, and even if I did, Susan would have had some pointed words for me from wherever she is. But I needed a little time to sit with something before I put it into a conversation. And I wasn't ready for Kevin to make it about Thanksgiving, because he would have, with good intentions, with genuine remorse probably, but it would have become about that, about the apology, and I didn't want to mix those two things together. The news moved faster than I expected. The firm put out a press release on Thursday morning. I hadn't anticipated how quickly it would circulate. By Friday, there was a piece in the Ottawa Citizen, a short one, but there. By the weekend, it had been picked up by a couple of industry publications. Infrastructure tech is a small world. People I hadn't heard from in years started texting. Kevin texted me on Saturday morning. He said, "Dad, I just saw something online. Is this about you?" I said yes. There was a pause, a long pause, the kind that you can feel even through a phone screen. Then he called. His voice was careful. He said he didn't know. He said he had no idea I'd been working on something like this. He said it again, actually. I had no idea, like he was saying it to himself as much as to me. I said I know. He asked why I hadn't told him. I said I wasn't sure yet, that I'd been thinking about it, and that it was a fair question, and he deserved an honest answer, and I didn't quite have one yet. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you okay?" And that, of all the things he could have said, was what got me. I said yes. I said I was more than okay. He came to Ottawa the following Sunday, drove down on his own, without Gillian, which told me this was a conversation he'd decided to have on his terms. We went for lunch at a diner near Lansdowne, that we used to go to when he was young. He had the bacon and eggs. I had the same. We talked for almost 3 hours. He didn't make a speech. He didn't do a formal apology with a list of specific items. He sat across from me and said, "I think I've been treating you like someone who needs managing instead of someone I should actually be talking to, and I'm sorry for that." He said he didn't fully understand when it happened or why, but that seeing this, gesturing vaguely at, I suppose, the whole situation, had made him realize something had shifted in how he saw me that wasn't fair. I told him I appreciated that. I told him I didn't need to revisit Thanksgiving. He nodded, and I could see the relief in it, and I didn't hold the relief against him. I said there was one thing I wanted him to understand, not as a criticism, just as information. I said that what hurt wasn't the dinner. Dinners are dinners. What hurt was the assumption underneath it, the assumption that I was a variable to be managed around, not a person to be included. I said that I'd felt that assumption building for a while, long before Thanksgiving. I said I'd like it if, going forward, we could talk to each other like two adults who both have things worth saying. He said yes. He said of course. He looked like a man who had needed someone to say that to him clearly for some time and wasn't sure how to be grateful for it. We split the bill. He insisted on paying. I let him because some gestures are worth allowing. Gillian called me the following week. She was more formal about it. She's a formal person, which I understand now as a quality and not a judgment. She said she wanted to apologize properly. She did. I accepted it. I don't think we'll ever be close in the easy way that some fathers and daughters-in-law manage. But we understand each other better now, and that's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. Chen Wei and I brought on 2 engineers in January. The sales lead followed in February, a woman who'd spent 15 years selling software to municipal governments and knew exactly what we were talking about from the first conversation. The Kingston pilot concluded with a full contract. The Northern Ontario municipality signed in March. We have 4 more in conversation. I still work out of my second bedroom. I've been offered nicer offices and I keep saying maybe later. I like my desk. I like the view of the backyard. I like that the cookies Patricia's kids make are in my kitchen and I can eat one whenever I want. What I think about sometimes, when I'm working late or when I'm on the train to Toronto for a meeting or when I'm just sitting in my armchair watching the streetlights come on, is what Susan would have said about all of it. Not the investment, not the company. The other part. Kevin at the diner. The 3 hours. The way something shifted back into place that I hadn't even known was crooked until it straightened. I think she would have said I waited too long to tell him what I needed. She'd have been right. I think she also would have said that the point was never to prove something to my son. The point was always the work itself, the thing that needed building, the problem that had annoyed me for 30 years. The 2 years in a room by myself believing in something when there was no external reason yet to believe. The vindication, if that's even the right word, was secondary, almost incidental. I was 67 years old, sitting alone on Thanksgiving, eating reheated soup and working on something nobody knew about, and it turned out that was exactly enough. I keep coming back to the image of myself sitting in that armchair on Thanksgiving evening, the soup going cold on the counter, the streetlights coming on outside one by one. At the time, it felt like a small humiliation. Looking back now, I think it was something closer to a turning point, though not the dramatic kind you see in movies, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. What I've come to understand is that things don't just happen to us, they accumulate. The way Kevin had slowly started treating me like a problem to be scheduled around, that didn't come from nowhere, and it didn't fix itself on its own either. It shifted when I stopped waiting for him to see me differently and started simply being someone worth seeing, not to prove a point, just because that's what honest living requires. There's something I've noticed about the people I've respected most over the years, the engineers I worked alongside for 3 decades, the ones whose judgment I trusted when a bridge design was under pressure or a water main assessment was being rushed. They all had the same quality underneath everything else. They did the right thing even when nobody was watching. Not for recognition, not for the moment when someone would finally notice. Just because the work mattered and the standard mattered and cutting corners wasn't something they could live with quietly. That's what I'd call integrity, though the word sounds formal for what I mean. It's simpler than that. It's just, are you the same person in the room alone as you are when people are paying attention? I was 65 when I started building the platform. Nobody knew. Nobody was going to give me a performance review or a pat on the back. Jenway was 26 and brilliant, and she believed in the idea, but even she didn't know, in those early months, whether the old retired engineer she'd taken a contract with actually had something real. I had to hold that uncertainty myself and keep going anyway. That's not a special gift. It's a decision you make over and over, on the mornings when it feels pointless and the evenings when you're not sure the math works out. You make it because the problem is real and someone ought to solve it and you happen to know how. And Kevin, I don't want to flatten what happened between us into a lesson because he's my son and it's more complicated than a lesson. But I'll say this, the conversation we had at that diner near Lansdowne mattered more to me than the investment. Not because I needed the apology, though it was good to hear. Because it was honest, because he sat across from me and said something true instead of something careful, and that took something from him. It took the willingness to look at a situation clearly even when the clear view wasn't flattering. I think that's what I'd want anyone to take from this, if they're sitting with something similar. Not that patience is always rewarded, because sometimes it isn't. Not that hard work guarantees a particular outcome, because it doesn't, but that the kind of person you are becoming while you wait, while you're alone in the second bedroom, while the family dinner goes on without you, while you're deciding whether to keep going or let it go, that's not incidental to the story. That is the story. Susan knew that. She always did. I just needed a little longer to catch up.